Our story starts in a liquor store, where we find out the owner is selling directly to retailers, which is totally illegal since he's basically trying to dodge taxes. But his little scheme doesn't go as planned, because suddenly, a woman in a black suit walks in. The moment the owner sees her, he freaks out. Turns out, her name is Young. The guy tries to run, but Young and her team from Jdrama Beverages corner him. She's not just someone who goes after tax evaders, she makes sure no one scams her company either. Later, after Young takes down the liquor store owner before he could pull off his scam, the team throws a big celebration for her. We find out that Young is the sharpest and most famous one among them, and she's also their team leader. What's even crazier is that she's still super young. In just a few years at the company, she's skyrocketed sales, making Jdrama Beverages drink the top-selling one. Meanwhile, we see the CEO of the company holding a drink called Nero, saying it's the best barley drink he's ever had. The guy behind it is Yun Minjo, and the CEO wants him to create a signature drink for Jdrama. But here's the problem. Yun Minjo is a genius when it comes to brewing, and he refuses to work for just anyone, no matter how much they offer him. Enter Ryam, the marketing team's ace. She's incredibly talented, and despite coming from a wealthy family, she built her success with her own hard work. At the same time, we meet Chan, a young guy who somehow manages to find Yun Minjo's brewery. He begs him for a job because he's a huge fan, but Minjo shuts him down instantly. Then, out of nowhere, he looks into Chan's eyes and senses he's a good kid. So he tells him he'll call him later. But Chan isn't just there for a job. He asks Minjo for a special drink, pretending it's a gift for his sister. Minjo hands it over, but we find out Chan actually got it for Young. They're super close friends, not siblings. When Young takes a sip of the drink, she's immediately blown away and finally understands the hype. Minjo, on the other hand, is a quiet, reserved guy who likes keeping to himself. One day, he gets a call from an unknown number and ignores it. Then a text pops up. It's Ryam from Jdrama, offering him an exclusive deal. He still doesn't reply. Minjo runs his brewery with just 5 workers, and he refuses to work with big companies because those 5 employees are like family to him. If he left, they'd have nowhere else to go. Meanwhile, Young heads home after a long, exhausting day. She lives with her sick grandmother and takes care of everything for her. The next day, Minjo has something important to do. It's his little brother's birthday. But he has a cat and doesn't know who to leave it with. He asks Chan for a favor, and despite running his own food truck, Chan drops everything to help. At the same time, Ryam and her assistant are on their way to see Minjo too. By chance, they run into Chan, who instantly falls for Ryam at first sight. He plays it cool for a bit before admitting he's not actually Minjo, just his boss's assistant, and tells them to come back later. Meanwhile, Minjo meets his younger half-brother. Their dad was a high-ranking military officer, strict, cold, and tough. We learn that Minjo's relationship with his father is rocky because his dad never showed him any warmth. When Minjo's mom passed away, his father barely reacted. At the funeral, he even told Minjo to man up and stop crying like a little girl. That moment created a huge emotional wall between them. Now, Minjo's father confronts him for moving out, but Minjo fires back, saying he left because his dad constantly called him mentally unstable. This is where we learn about Minjo's unusual ability. Just by looking into someone's eyes, he can instantly sense what they're feeling. This ability makes him deeply sensitive to people, which is why he prefers to be alone. But he's not there to argue, he just wants to take his little brother out and ditches the fancy party his dad threw just to impress his military buddies. At the same time, Young receives devastating news. Her entire team is getting laid off. Jdrama sales have plummeted thanks to Nero's success, and the only way to keep their jobs is to sign a deal with Yun Minjo. Later, Minjo visits an amusement park. He sees a giant teddy bear he really likes, but it's not for sale. You can only win it by scoring 700 points in a shooting game. But Minjo sucks at aiming, so he gives up immediately. Then, out of nowhere, a girl steps up. She's a sharpshooter. She nails the game and wins the bear for him, but she's clearly upset about something. She keeps repeating Yun Minjo's name without even realizing it. When Minjo approaches her to tell her that's his name, he looks into her eyes and instantly feels her pain. In that moment, He understands just how broken she is inside. But Minjo can't seem to get a word out. She hands him the teddy bear, gives him a small smile, and then walks away. The next day, Young heads straight to her team, trying to figure out what's going on. But when she gets there, the head of marketing from the main office is already waiting for her. He gives her a direct offer. If she can get Yun Minjo to sign a contract and create a special drink for their company, they won't fire her team. On top of that, there'll be bonuses for everyone. Of course, Young doesn't hesitate. She has no other option if she wants to save her team. The very next day, she's transferred to the company's headquarters. There, she meets the marketing director, who explains Minjo's offer in detail. Young decides to visit him right away. But before she can, Ryam beats her to it. She gets there first, introduces herself, and lays out the company's proposal. Minjo listens but immediately shuts them down. He has no interest in working with anyone, let alone making a custom drink for a big corporation. He stands up and leaves. But before he can get too far, 2 more representatives from Jisan Beverage show up. This time, it's Young. The moment Minjo sees her, he recognizes her, and she realizes why she had been shouting his name the other night. Young tries to explain the deal to him, but once again, Minjo refuses and walks away. Desperate, Young runs after him, barefoot, not even bothering to grab her shoes. She pleads with him, trying to convince him, but he can tell she's not just doing this for work. There's real desperation in her voice. Feeling bad for her, he hands her a pair of slippers so she doesn't hurt her feet. But he still refuses. He makes it clear, he won't accept any offer from Jisan. He walks away, frustrated, but also strangely upset for her. Back home, Minjo retreats to his special room, a place where he goes to calm down. He lights his scented candles, trying to push away any emotions bothering him. But as the smoke rises, it starts filling the room, making it look from the outside like the place is on fire. Young notices the smoke and rushes over. Minjo's workers panic and try calling for help, but Young tells them to leave it to her. She climbs onto the roof, ties a rope, and sneaks into Minjo's window. Minjo is stunned. He has no idea why she'd risk herself like that. When he asks, she just shrugs and says she was worried about him. But now that she sees he's okay, he owes her a favor. She grins, teases him a little, and starts to leave. Minjo follows her, ready to scold her, but before he can say much, his workers stop him. They tell him to just let Young go. She's clearly going through something. Later, Young runs into Ryam and her assistant, who reveal that the company actually sent both of them to convince Minjo. It's now a full-blown competition. The next day, Young tries again. But this time, Minjo has told his workers to block her at all costs. She doesn't let that stop her. She wins over each worker in her own way, giving them little gifts, playing along with their personalities. When she meets 2 older women who work for Minjo, she plays the hungry guest card, making them feel bad for her. They cook her a meal, and she wins them over by complimenting their food, calling it the best thing she's ever tasted. But Minjo soon realizes Young is getting closer, so he runs off to his farm to hide. There he sees one of his workers, a woman stuck on a ladder, struggling with some farm work. He rushes to help, but before he can, he realizes she's the same lady who cooked for Young. Eventually, Young manages to meet Minjo again. But when he rejects her offer once more, she doesn't give up. Instead, she tells him she's staying and will help out on the farm. As she works alongside him, she begins to see how much he cares for his employees. He provides them with everything they need: good food, comfortable living spaces. He treats them like family. Meanwhile, back at Jisan's headquarters, Ryam catches a delicious scent in the air. It turns out to be coming from Chan's food truck. The moment Chan sees her, he completely freezes. Trying to impress her, he tells her he'll make the best sandwich she's ever had. She takes a bite, and she's hooked. At the same time, over at the farm, Minjo walks up to Young with a cake and her favorite coffee. He even ties her hair up gently with a hairband, showing a softer side of himself. That night, after a long day of work, Young drinks a little too much. She starts venting about her team, how they'll be fired if she doesn't get Minjo to sign the deal. Listening to her, Minjo finally understands. This wasn't just about business for her. This was her last chance to save her people. From that moment on, Minjo starts treating Young differently. He opens up to her, telling her about his father, how he was strict, how Minjo's sensitivity made him seem weak in his father's eyes, and how he was often taken advantage of because of it. But despite everything, Minjo has always had a soft spot for people in need. Young reassures him, telling him he's not weak or foolish. He's just a genuinely good person. Her words hit him hard. Minjo then shares something personal. 6 years ago, he was in an accident that nearly took his life. But someone saved him. Ever since then, he's been searching for that person, hoping to meet them again. The next day, Ryam tries to sabotage Young's efforts. She visits Minjo's workers and even the villagers, spreading rumors that Young is there to steal Minjo away from them. So basically, Young rolls up, and the villagers ain't having it. They straight up start throwing salt at her, telling her to get lost, 'cause they think she's just trying to take advantage of them. But Joe, nah, he's not about to let that slide. He stands up for her against all of them. Still, after Young leaves, Joe feels bad and apologizes. He even invites her over so she can wash off all the salt. She actually does it, and after her shower, they sit down, and Joe starts telling her about how the villagers and his workers are actually really good people. He explains that when he first started out, they had his back and helped him a lot, so she shouldn't take it personally. It's probably just a misunderstanding. Then, he takes Young back to the workers and lets them know he's signing the contract with her company, but it won't mess with their jobs or anything. They get on board, but of course, Ryam is salty and storms off. Chan, being the peacemaker, tries to cheer her up by making her a sandwich. Classic move. The next day, Joe heads to the company to make things official. That's when he finds out Young's got a whole team ready to work on this special drink with him. Her squad includes her old assistant, BOM, plus Ryam, Rao, and the marketing manager. The marketing guy is hyped that Young pulled this deal off. And of course Joe, being Joe, just has to drag Chan into it, announcing that he'll be his right-hand man for the project. After the signing, the whole team goes out to celebrate. Joe even writes down that Chan is the perfect assistant. Not because he's super smart, honestly, dude's a little clueless sometimes, but because he's got insane strength and is actually good at a lot of stuff. But then, Joe starts noticing something. He's catching feelings for Young. At first, he tries to brush it off, but nope, the feelings just keep growing. It gets even worse when he sees her hanging out with BOM. The jealousy? Real. Meanwhile, Joe's got a ton of work piling up with his company because some distributors are slacking on their orders. His workers are exhausted, so Young and her team decide to jump in and help. This brings her and Joe even closer. After work, Young ends up going to Joe's personal space, his little sanctuary where he escapes from people. She finds out he's really into photography and even sees a picture of herself hanging in his room. Without thinking, she jokes, "I'm taking this." But Joe. He hits her with the, "I love you." She's shook. He tries to play it off, saying he meant the picture, but she knows exactly what he meant. Instead of addressing it, she suddenly remembers she has somewhere to be and dips. Meanwhile, Joe visits his dad's house to see his little brother. That's when he finds out there's a guest coming over, the same girl who helped him years ago. He's stunned to realize his dad's been in contact with her this whole time and never told him. But what really blows his mind? That girl is Young. Joe's over the moon. The girl he's been in love with is the same one who saved him all those years ago. It's like fate, right? But Young's reaction is weird. She lets out this forced laugh, and Joe immediately knows something's up. She's upset, but she's hiding it. After dinner, she bounces without saying another word, and Joe is not okay. Then, she disappears for a few days. No calls, no texts, nothing. The dude's losing his mind. When she finally comes back to work, the workers tell her Joe would not shut up about her the entire time she was gone. Like, dude was basically obsessed. As soon as he sees her, he runs to her like a little kid. But Young remembers the night she saved him and suddenly feels emotional. She tries to act normal, but Joe can tell something's wrong. Trying to move past it, they finally start working on the special drink for Ji-sang. Once they're done, Joe tries to lighten the mood and asks Chan how he and Young first met. Chan just smirks and says it's a secret. Turns out, they actually met at the gym, and because they're both kinda dumb, they challenged each other so hard they both passed out. From then on, they became best buds. Then, disaster strikes. Rao's dad gets into a serious accident and ends up in the hospital. Joe and Young rush there with him and find out his dad had a stroke. The doctors tell Rao he needs to sign off on a risky surgery, one that might work but also might make things worse. Young suddenly remembers when her grandma went through the same thing, and it hits her hard. She encourages Rao to go through with the surgery, telling him this is his dad's best shot at survival. She tries to be there for him, making sure he doesn't feel alone in the decision. From that day on, he was the one responsible for his dad, not the other way around. She told him to quit crying and come with her to pick up some stuff for his pops. So yeah, Young ended up buying adult diapers for his dad and told him straight up, "Look, he's not going to be able to go to the bathroom on his own anymore, so you gotta take care of that." She reminded him that his dad was old and would probably feel embarrassed, so he had to be gentle with him. Young knew a lot about taking care of elderly people, experience, you know? Since she lived with her grandma and all. Meanwhile, Joho helped out too by covering the hospital bills for Ro. He told him he was basically his boss now and part of his team, so he looks out for the people working with him. Later on, Joe offered Young a ride home since it was raining, and when they got there, her grandma popped her head out the window, called out to Joe, and basically insisted he come up for dinner. Of course, dude didn't hesitate for a second. He was in. He spent a good amount of time with Young and her grandma, just vibing. At one point, Young was so exhausted she crashed right there, and her grandma, being the wise lady she was, saw that Joe was actually a solid guy for her granddaughter. Later, Joe confessed to her grandma that he really liked Young, but he was gonna wait for the right time to tell her. Then, he carried Young to her room like some rom-com lead and dipped. Next day, Young woke up to a message from Joe, saying he knew everything now. Turns out, her grandma had told him that on the night Young saved his life, Grandma had gotten really sick. She tried calling Young over and over, but Young was too busy with Joe to notice. That messed with Grandma's health real bad, and ever since, she hadn't even been able to leave the house. Young felt like crap. She rushed to find Joe, but the workers told her he was MIA. She finally found him chilling alone in this tiny cabin up on the hill near his farm. She told him straight up, "You don't have to run away or feel guilty. If the same thing happened again, I'd still save you." But Joe admitted he felt terrible. Seeing how worried Young was about him, he finally just let it out. He told her he loved her. Young was so flustered she didn't know what to say, so Joe was like, "It's cool. I get it. You're not sure about your feelings yet. Just tell me when you are." Meanwhile, Chan and Ryam's relationship had leveled up. Ryam actually confessed to Chan that she liked him and wanted to be together. Chan was so shocked he just got up and started dancing in the middle of the place. When their friends found out, they couldn't believe it. They even grabbed Ryam and were like, "Yo, blink twice if you're being held hostage." But Ryam laughed it off, saying she was the one who confessed first. Anyway, back to Young. She was working with Joe like normal, and he wasn't acting weird around her at all. No pressure. Just business as usual. But then one day, this random girl pulled up at the farm. She introduced herself as Lim from Beck Beverages. Young was like, yeah, Joe already signed a deal with your company, but Lim said she needed to talk to Joe about something else." When Joe showed up, he immediately recognized her and was like, "How'd you even find me?" Lim smiled and said, "Damn, can't believe I'm actually seeing you. Crazy how my ex got even hotter after dumping me." Young heard that and was instantly burning with jealousy. She sat there, pretending she wasn't listening, but totally listening. She found out that Lim and Joe were high school sweethearts, totally in love, until Joe just stopped feeling it. He broke things off and left. There wasn't even any drama. He just outgrew the relationship and moved on. Young, on the other hand, was fuming. She was in her head, having a whole internal meltdown over it. And then Joe came up to her laughing and said, "Damn, the smell of jealousy is strong in here." He reassured her it was all ancient history and then, out of nowhere, asked her out on a real date. He figured she'd play hard to get, maybe say no, But nope. She agreed on the spot. So they went out, and Young showed up looking straight up stunning. She'd obviously gotten some fashion help from Ryam. She even asked, "Wait, this is a date, right?" And it was an amazing one. She floated home on cloud 9. But her happiness didn't last long. Because when she got back, her grandma wasn't there. Then, she got a call from the hospital. Her grandma had passed away. Just like that, the worst day of Young's life hit her like a truck. She rushed over, barely believing it, until she saw the body. That was it. Reality crashed in. As she handled the funeral arrangements, she found a voice recording on her grandma's phone. Apparently, Grandma knew she was going, and she had called an ambulance herself. While she waited, she recorded a goodbye message, telling Young how much she loved her, how she wouldn't have even lived the past 6 years without her, and how she wanted her to be happy. To live her life. Really live it. Everyone, her old team, her new team, showed up to support her. Joe could tell Young was trying to keep it together with a fake smile, but he knew what she was really feeling inside. Then, out of nowhere, her dad showed up. She hadn't seen him since he and her mom bailed, leaving her with Grandma because they were too young to handle raising a kid. She looked him dead in the eye and said, "If you're here to pay your respects, fine. But if you're here to give me some useless apology, don't bother. I don't want to hear it." And with that, she shut him out, just like he had shut her out all those years ago. Young walked out of the hall, totally wrecked. Joe saw her leave, ran after her, and just hugged her tight. He couldn't hold back his tears. He hated seeing her like this. She started crying too, and they just stood there, both a mess. But then came the hardest part for Young, packing up her grandma's stuff and putting it away. It felt like erasing her, and that was killing her inside. So, after moving everything, she completely freaked out and put it all back, like some part of her refused to accept that her grandma was really gone. She sat there, sobbing her heart out, until Joe showed up at her door. When she opened it, he was standing there with his crew, ready to do whatever it took to help her feel better. He got her to work out with them, hoping it'd distract her, and they cooked up a feast, telling her, "Cry all you want, sometimes that's the only thing that helps." That same day, Chan walked Ryu home, holding her hand. But the second Ryu's mom saw them, she was like, "Who's this dude?" When Ryu said he was her boyfriend, her mom flipped out. Dude didn't exactly scream rich and successful. And when she found out he worked on a food truck, oh man, she lost it. But Ryu wasn't having any of that classist nonsense. She straight up told her mom, "I don't want to be like you, stuck up and judgy. I just want to marry someone I actually love." Then she stormed off, ran straight to Chan, and just broke down crying from pure embarrassment. Chan pulled her close, trying to comfort her, telling her she was beautiful. She sniffled and was like, "Dude, now's not the time." Meanwhile, Young was all caught up in her feelings, and before she knew it, she finally confessed to Joe. She told him she loved him, and just like that, they were officially together. They didn't announce it or anything, but, like, it was super obvious. Fast forward, they finally nailed their drink formula, and when CEO Ji-sang tried it, he knew right away he made the right call signing Joe. Meanwhile, Ryu was getting to know Chan better, and one day, she asked why he lived so far from his family. That's when he opened up about his past. Turns out, he used to be in the Special Forces. He thought it was his dream job until, during one mission, he had to take someone out, thinking they were a terrorist. But they weren't. Even though his squad was like, "Man, that kind of stuff happens," he just couldn't shake it. But instead of showing weakness, he pushed through for years, letting it eat him alive. It got so bad, he started seeing blood everywhere, even in his food. It messed him up bad and put a strain on his family, so he finally left, hoping they'd have a chance at happiness without him dragging them down. Every now and then, he'd get hit with panic attacks so bad he needed meds, and right then, as he was telling Ryu all this, one hit him hard. He bolted, not wanting her to see him like that, but she ran after him. And that's when she realized, she was falling for him even more. Meanwhile, Joe's whole life started changing ever since Young showed up. His dad, who had always been cold and distant, finally sat down with him, apologized for all the years of being a hard ass, and admitted that he just never knew how to show love after losing his wife. Joe, on the other hand, was killing it. He even won Best Drink of the Year with their company's new product. Meanwhile, Chan was being a total pain in the ass with Ryu's family. Dude just wouldn't quit. He kept showing up, bringing sandwiches, until Ryu's dad became his #1 fan. The man literally couldn't go a day without eating his food. Eventually, he was like, screw it, let the kid marry my daughter. After all that success, Joe and his team launched their drink officially, and it became a massive hit. But just when everything was looking up, Young went to the marketing director and told him her part of the deal was done. It was his turn to keep his word. He assured her he wasn't firing her team and that they'd all continue working together. But now Young was stuck. Should she go back to her old team, or stick with the people who had become her family? She asked Joe what he thought, and he just smiled and said, "Go wherever makes you happy. I got your back no matter what." After thinking long and hard, Young made her decision. She turned in her resignation letter. The director tried hard to make her stay, but in the end, he respected her choice. She packed up her stuff, hugged her team goodbye, and told them this wasn't a goodbye, just the end of one chapter and the start of another. Of course, she was totally lying. The second she got back to Joe, she broke down crying, heartbroken over leaving the one place she had truly loved. Meanwhile, Chan and Ryu finally took the next step. They got a place together, and Chan even got her a ring. When he proposed, she obviously said yes. They decided to surprise their families with the news. And as for Young, she did exactly what she said she would. She started a new chapter. She opened up her own little drink shop, a cozy spot for anyone who just needed a break from the craziness of life. And just like she told her team, they all stayed in touch, like one big family. And that's it. That's how the show ends. Alright, that's a wrap for this video. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.